London, 1847. The crystal chandeliers of Ravenscroft House cast their golden glow upon the cream-coloured walls, illuminating the gathered aristocracy in their finest evening attire. The scent of jasmine and rosewater mingled with the delicate aroma of freshly brewed tea as the string quartet played a gentle waltz in the corner of the grand ballroom. Charlotte Brandon stood by the large bay window, her slender fingers tracing patterns on the cold glass pane. At 23, she was considered a great beauty of London society, her auburn hair elegantly styled in soft curls that framed her heart-shaped face, her emerald eyes reflecting both intelligence and vulnerability. As the daughter of the late Earl of Ravenscroft, she possessed not only considerable fortune, but also the refined manners and accomplishments expected of a young lady of her station. "My dearest niece," Lady Millicent, Charlotte's maternal aunt and guardian since her parents' passing, approached with a knowing smile. "The Marquis of Whitmore has been watching you all evening. Perhaps you might grant him the next dance." Charlotte's heart fluttered traitorously in her chest. "Has he indeed, aunt? I had not noticed." It was a falsehood, of course. Charlotte had been acutely aware of Patrick Baskerville's presence from the moment he had entered the ballroom. The Marquis of Whitmore was the very embodiment of masculine elegance, tall and broad-shouldered, with raven-black hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see through all pretense. For months now, he had been a frequent visitor to Ravenscroft House, engaging Charlotte in conversations about literature and music, accompanying her on walks through the gardens, and sending bouquets of flowers that she carefully preserved between the pages of her leather-bound journal. "Do not play coy with me, child," Lady Millicent chided gently. "The whole of London society speaks of nothing but the possibility of an engagement between you two. Your uncle and I could not be more pleased with the match." "You presume too much, aunt," Charlotte replied, though she could not prevent the blush that coloured her cheeks. "The Marquis has made no declaration of his intentions." As if summoned by their conversation, Patrick Baskerville appeared before them, executing a perfect bow. "Lady Millicent, Miss Brandon, I trust you are enjoying the evening's festivities." "Indeed we are, Lord Whitmore," Lady Millicent responded, with barely concealed delight. "In fact, I was just remarking that my niece has not yet danced this evening." "A grievous oversight that must be remedied at once," Patrick replied smoothly, extending his gloved hand toward Charlotte. "Would you do me the honor, Miss Brandon?" Charlotte cursed, her eyes downcast to hide the longing in them. "You are too kind, my lord." As Patrick led her to the dance floor, Charlotte was keenly aware of the many eyes watching them, the approving glances of the matrons, the envious stares of other young ladies, the speculative looks of gentlemen calculating her dowry. But none of that mattered when Patrick's hand settled at her waist and they began to move in perfect harmony to the music. "So you look particularly enchanting this evening, Miss Brandon," Patrick murmured, his voice like velvet against her ear. "You flatter me, Lord Whitmore," Charlotte replied, struggling to maintain her composure. "Merely stating facts, I assure you." His smile was dazzling, yet Charlotte could not help but notice how his gaze drifted momentarily to Lady Sophia Harrington, who was dancing nearby with her elderly husband. The observation sent a painful twinge through Charlotte's heart. It was not the first time she had noticed Patrick's wandering attention. Though he played the part of devoted suitor admirably, there were moments, fleeting but unmistakable, when his indifference toward her became apparent. Yet she clung desperately to the hope that his affections would grow in time, that one day his eyes would light up at the sight of her, the way hers did for him. From across the ballroom, another pair of eyes watched their dance with barely concealed longing. David Percy, the Duke of Ashford, stood tall and distinguished, his honey-brown hair neatly combed, his kind hazel eyes following Charlotte's every movement. Though a duke outranked a marquis in the rigid hierarchy of the aristocracy, David's quiet dignity and genuine nature had failed to capture Charlotte's attention the way Patrick's charismatic presence had. "Admiring Miss Brandon again, I see," remarked Lord Pembroke, David's closest friend since their days at Eton. "Is it so obvious?" David asked with a self-deprecating smile. "Only to those who know you well," Lord Pembroke replied. "You have been devoted to her for nearly 2 seasons now. Why not declare yourself?" David's expression turned wistful. "Her heart lies elsewhere, I fear, and I would rather have her friendship than nothing at all." When the dance concluded, Charlotte found herself being approached by the Duke of Ashford. His manner was gentle, his smile genuine as he bowed before her. "Miss Brandon, might I request the pleasure of the next dance?" Charlotte hesitated, her eyes involuntarily seeking Patrick, who had already moved to converse with a group of gentlemen near the card-room. With a small sigh, she turned back to David and nodded. "I would be delighted, Your Grace." As they waltzed across the polished floor, Charlotte was struck by the stark contrast between her two suitors. Where Patrick was all charm and intensity, David exuded a calming steadfastness. His conversation was thoughtful and considerate, his attention unwavering. "You seem distracted this evening, Miss Brandon," David observed quietly. "I hope you are not unwell." "Merely contemplative, Your Grace," Charlotte replied. "The changing of seasons always renders me pensive." "Ah, yes, the transition from summer to autumn does inspire reflection," David agreed. "Though I find beauty in every season, each with its own character and charm, much like the people we encounter in life." Charlotte glanced up at him, struck by the sincerity in his eyes. For a brief moment she glimpsed something profound in his gaze, a depth of feeling that both flattered and discomfited her. "You have a poet's soul, Your Grace," she remarked lightly. "Not a poet, Miss Brandon, merely a man who appreciates true beauty when he beholds it." The dance ended before Charlotte could formulate a response to such an earnest compliment. David escorted her back to Lady Millicent with impeccable courtesy, bowing over her hand with genuine respect. "I thank you for the dance, Miss Brandon. Perhaps I might call upon you tomorrow. I have acquired some new volumes of poetry that I believe would interest you." "You are most welcome to call, Your Grace," Charlotte replied with politeness, though her eyes had already drifted back to Patrick, who was now engaged in animated conversation with Lady Sophia. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of social niceties and careful observations. Charlotte found herself increasingly aware of Patrick's divided attention, how his eyes sought her out when Lady Millicent was nearby, yet wandered freely when he believed himself unobserved. Each such instance drove a splinter deeper into her heart, yet she continued to nurture the fragile hope that his feelings would change. As the carriage bore them home through the fog-shrouded streets of London, Lady Millicent could scarcely contain her excitement. "The Marquis was most attentive this evening," she declared, patting Charlotte's hand. "I would not be surprised if he calls tomorrow with a specific purpose in mind." Charlotte stared out into the darkness, her reflection ghostly in the glass. "Perhaps," she whispered, unwilling to voice her deepest fears, that Patrick Baskerville's attentions were motivated more by her fortune and family connections than by any genuine affection. In the solitude of her bedchamber, as her lady's maid helped her prepare for the night, Charlotte allowed herself to contemplate the two men who had dominated her thoughts that evening. Patrick, who made her heart race with a mere glance, yet whose constancy she increasingly questioned. And David, steady and true, whose devotion she had come to rely upon without truly appreciating its depth. The following week brought a flurry of social engagements that left Charlotte scarcely a moment for reflection. Morning calls, afternoon rides in Hyde Park, evening soirees, all blended together in a whirlwind of activity. Through it all, Patrick Baskerville remained a constant presence, his attentions becoming increasingly marked, fueling the whispers of an imminent engagement. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Charlotte sat in the drawing-room of Ravenscroft House, her fingers moving deftly over the ivory keys of the pianoforte. The melancholy strains of Beethoven filled the air, reflecting the strange disquiet that had settled over her spirit, despite the seemingly favorable turn of events. "Your playing has improved remarkably," came Patrick's voice from the doorway. Charlotte's fingers faltered momentarily before she composed herself and finished the piece. "Lord Whitmore, I did not hear you enter." Patrick moved to stand beside the instrument, resplendent in a perfectly tailored coat of midnight blue. "Your aunt has granted me a private audience with you," he said, his expression unreadable. "I believe she expects me to return with joyful news." Charlotte's heart began to race. Was this the moment she had dreamed of for so long? She rose from the pianoforte bench, smoothing the folds of her emerald silk dress with trembling hands. "Indeed? And what news might that be, my lord?" Patrick paced to the window, his back turned to her for a long moment before he spoke again. "Society expects us to marry, Miss Brandon. Our families would be delighted by the match. Your fortune would restore the Whitmore estates, which have, I admit, seen better days." Charlotte stood frozen, the cold practicality of his words dousing her romantic hopes like ice water. "You speak of marriage, as though it were merely a business arrangement. Is it not? Patrick turned to face her, his handsome features set in lines of resignation. We are of the nobility, Miss Brandon. Sentiment rarely factors into such decisions. Sentiment? You speak of love as though it were a trifling matter, Charlotte replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Patrick's expression softened slightly as he approached her. Charlotte, he said, using her given name for the first time, you are a beautiful, accomplished young woman. Any man would be fortunate to call you his wife. Any man but you, it seems, she responded, her perceptiveness cutting through his careful words. A flash of surprise crossed Patrick's face before he nodded slowly. You deserve honesty, at least. I admire you greatly, but I must be clear, I will never love you, not in the way you deserve. The words struck her like physical blows, each syllable hammering against her heart. Charlotte turned away, desperate to hide the tears that threatened to spill from her eyes. My affections lie elsewhere, Patrick continued, oblivious to the devastation he was causing. But they are engaged where they cannot be returned. A marriage between us could still be advantageous for both our families. Charlotte drew a deep, steadying breath before facing him again, her chin held high, despite the pain coursing through her. I thank you for your honesty, Lord Whitmore, but I must decline your offer such as it is. I may not have the luxury of marrying for love, but neither will I bind myself to a man who has plainly stated he can never return my affections. Patrick appeared genuinely taken aback by her refusal. You would reject the opportunity to become a marchioness, to secure your family's position and join two great houses? I would, Charlotte replied with newfound resolve. My father left me well provided for. I need not sell myself to restore another family's fortune. A flash of anger crossed Patrick's face, followed quickly by wounded pride. As you wish, Miss Brandon. I had thought you more sensible, and I had thought you more honorable than to offer a woman everything but your heart, Charlotte countered, surprising herself with her boldness. Patrick bowed stiffly. I shall take my leave, then. Please make whatever excuses to your aunt you deem appropriate. As the door closed behind him, Charlotte sank onto the nearest chair, her composure finally crumbling. The tears she had fought so valiantly to contain now flowed freely down her cheeks. How foolish she had been to imagine that Patrick Baskerville could ever truly love her. All those months of attention, the meaningful glances, the carefully worded compliments, all had been merely the calculated moves of a man seeking a favorable match. She was still seated thus, lost in her grief, when the butler announced another visitor. His Grace, the Duke of Ashford, he intoned, as David Percy entered the drawing-room. Charlotte hastily wiped away her tears, but there was no disguising her distress. David took one look at her face and was immediately at her side, concern evident in his expression. Miss Brandon, what has happened? Are you unwell? The genuine worry in his voice only served to heighten Charlotte's emotional state. Forgive me, Your Grace. I am not fit for company at present. Nonsense, David replied gently. I count myself your friend, Charlotte, if you will permit me that liberty. And friends need not always present a perfect facade to one another. His kindness was her undoing. Before she could stop herself, Charlotte found herself confiding in him about Patrick's cruel declaration and her own shattered dreams. David listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When she had finished, he took her hand in his touch warm and reassuring. Lord Whitmore is either a fool or blind, perhaps both, he said quietly. To hold your heart in his hands and cast it aside so carelessly is unforgivable. You are too kind, Your Grace, Charlotte murmured, embarrassed by her emotional display, yet strangely comforted by his presence. Not kind, truthful, David corrected her. Any man worthy of you would cherish your affections as the precious gift they are. Their eyes met, and for the first time Charlotte truly saw the man before her, not merely as Patrick's rival or as a titled gentleman of her acquaintance, but as a person of depth and character, whose steady gaze offered something her wounded heart desperately needed: respect. I have brought you something, David said after a moment, reaching into his coat. He withdrew a small leather-bound volume. Wordsworth's poems. I marked a passage that reminded me of you. Charlotte accepted the book, her fingers brushing against his. You are thoughtful as always, Your Grace. David, he said quietly, when we are not in formal company, I would be honored if you would call me David. A small smile tugged at Charlotte's lips, despite her sadness. Then you must call me Charlotte in return. Charlotte, he repeated, as though testing the sound of her name on his lips. Would you permit me to call upon you tomorrow? Perhaps a drive through the park might help lift your spirits. She nodded, suddenly grateful for his steadfast presence. I would like that very much, David. After the Duke's departure, Charlotte opened the volume he had given her, finding a ribbon marking a particular poem. As she read the words, lines about resilience and the quiet healing power of nature, she felt something shift within her, like the first faint light of dawn after the darkest night. That evening, she penned a letter to her cousin in Bath, requesting an invitation for an extended visit. London society, with its gossip and prying eyes, had become unbearable. She needed distance, from Patrick, from the humiliation of her rejected love, and, perhaps most importantly, from her own foolish heart. What she did not anticipate was how reluctant she would be to distance herself from the Duke of Ashford, whose kindness had been the sole bright spot in her darkest hour. The morning after Charlotte's painful encounter with Patrick, she awoke with swollen eyes and a heaviness in her chest that made even the simple act of rising from bed seem monumental. The leather-bound volume of Wordsworth's poems lay on her nightstand, where she had placed it before falling into fitful slumber. Her fingers traced the embossed title as she recalled the Duke of Ashford's, David's, kindness the previous day. Her lady's maid entered with a breakfast tray, her expression sympathetic. "A letter arrived for you this morning, miss. From His Grace, the Duke of Ashford." Charlotte accepted the sealed note, her heart lightening slightly at the sight of David's elegant handwriting. He confirmed their plans for an afternoon drive and expressed hope that she had found some solace in Wordsworth's verses. The genuine concern evident in every carefully chosen word provided Charlotte with enough strength to face the day ahead, a day that would undoubtedly include her aunt's questions about Patrick's visit. As expected, Lady Millicent was waiting in the morning room, her expression expectant. "Well, my dear, Lord Whitmore requested a private audience yesterday. I trust there is happy news to share." Charlotte steeled herself, chin raised slightly. "I'm afraid not, Aunt. Lord Whitmore and I had a frank discussion about our compatibility. We mutually agreed that a match between us would not be suitable." Lady Millicent's face fell, her disappointment palpable. "Not suitable? But, child, the Marquis is one of the most eligible gentlemen in London. What could possibly be unsuitable about such a match?" "Some discrepancies in temperament," Charlotte replied, unwilling to reveal the true humiliation she had suffered. "And in expectations for marriage." Before Lady Millicent could press further, Charlotte mentioned her invitation to visit Eleanor in Bath, presenting it as an opportunity to refresh herself before the winter season, rather than the escape it truly was. Though clearly displeased, her aunt could offer no reasonable objection, particularly when Charlotte suggested that a change of scenery might help her reconsider her position regarding suitable matches. The remainder of the morning passed in a blur of mundane activities: correspondence, needlework, a brief visit from Lady Pembroke and her daughters, all of which Charlotte endured with outward composure, while her mind continuously returned to Patrick's cruel words, "I will never love you." By the time David's carriage arrived that afternoon, Charlotte was desperate for respite from her thoughts. The Duke greeted her with warm concern, immediately noting her pallor despite her efforts to appear unaffected. "You did not sleep well," he observed, as he handed her into the carriage. Charlotte managed a small smile. "Is it so obvious?" "Only to one who cares to notice," David replied gently. As they drove through Hyde Park, the autumn landscape provided a melancholy backdrop to their conversation. Golden leaves drifted from the trees, a reminder of summer's end and the inexorable passage of time. David spoke little at first, seemingly content to allow Charlotte her contemplative silence, yet his presence beside her offered a quiet comfort she had not expected. "I've been thinking about what happened yesterday," Charlotte finally said, her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap. "I feel I must apologize for burdening you with my distress." David turned to her, his expression earnest. "There is no need for apology, Charlotte. I consider it a privilege that you felt able to confide in me. Still, it was hardly proper." "Propriety is a poor substitute for genuine human connection," he interrupted gently. "Your honesty was far more valuable to me than any social nicety." His words touched something deep within Charlotte. For so long, she had existed within the rigid confines of proper society, measuring her worth by how well she adhered to its expectations. Patrick had been part of that world, all surface charm and calculated moves, like pieces on a chessboard. David, though born to even higher rank, seemed to see beyond such constraints to what truly mattered. "I've decided to accept my cousin Eleanor's invitation to Bath," Charlotte said after a moment. "I feel I need some distance from London society at present." David nodded thoughtfully. Bath is lovely this time of year. The waters are said to have restorative properties for both body and spirit. Have you spent much time there? Some. I have a small property near the city that I visit occasionally. He hesitated briefly before adding, "Perhaps, if you would permit it, I might call upon you there during your stay." The prospect of continuing their acquaintance away from London's prying eyes brought unexpected warmth to Charlotte's cheeks. "I would like that very much." As their carriage completed its circuit of the park, Charlotte realized that for the first time since Patrick's rejection, she had gone nearly an hour without replaying his cruel words in her mind. David's steady presence had provided a respite from her pain, not by dismissing it or offering empty platitudes, but by reminding her simply through his attentiveness that she was worthy of genuine regard. The following week brought a flurry of social engagements that Charlotte could not avoid without causing speculation. At each event, she maintained a composed facade, though the effort drained her considerably. The worst came at Lady Harrington's musical evening, where Patrick was in attendance, looking entirely unaffected by their last encounter as he charmed the assembled company with his usual flair. What Charlotte had not anticipated was Lady Sophia Harrington's particular interest in the Marquis that evening, or the sharp pain she felt at witnessing their intimate exchanges. It was one thing to know abstractly that Patrick's affections lay elsewhere. It was quite another to see the object of those affections responding with equal warmth. "You're bearing it remarkably well," came David's quiet voice beside her, as she watched Patrick bend close to whisper something in Lady Sophia's ear. Charlotte started slightly, unaware that he had been observing her. "Am I so transparent?" "Only to those who take the trouble to look beyond the surface," he replied. "Would you care for some air? The conservatory should be cooler than this crowded room." Grateful for the excuse to remove herself, Charlotte accompanied him to Lady Harrington's famous conservatory, where exotic plants created a fragrant haven from the heat and noise of the gathering. The glass ceiling revealed a night sky scattered with stars, lending the space an otherworldly quality. "I leave for Bath the day after tomorrow," Charlotte said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "I find I'm looking forward to it more with each passing day. I imagine it must be difficult to maintain appearances when your heart is still raw," David observed. Charlotte nodded, surprised and touched by his perception. "It is not merely the pain of rejection," she admitted. "It is the humiliation of having been so thoroughly deceived. By Lord Whitmore, yes, but more significantly by my own heart. I believed his interest to be genuine when it was clearly motivated by practical considerations. Not all hearts are so calculating," David said softly. "Some are capable of recognizing true worth when they encounter it, without thought of advantage or position." There was something in his tone that made Charlotte look up at him sharply. The expression in his eyes, tender, admiring, yet hesitant, caused her breath to catch. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly consider the possibility that the Duke's attentions might be motivated by genuine affection rather than mere courtesy. Before she could formulate a response, they were interrupted by the approach of Lady Millicent, who had come in search of her niece. The moment passed, but Charlotte found herself contemplating it long afterward, during the quiet hours of the night when sleep eluded her. The day of Charlotte's departure for Bath arrived with unseasonable warmth, as though summer were making one final stand against autumn's advance. David called at Ravenscroft House that morning to bid her farewell, bringing with him a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "A few volumes for your journey," he explained, as she accepted it with thanks. "The hours can pass slowly, even on a relatively short trip like London to Bath." "You are always so thoughtful," Charlotte said, genuinely moved by his consideration. "It is easy to be thoughtful when one cares deeply," David replied simply. They stood for a moment in the entrance hall, the air between them charged with unspoken words. Charlotte found herself wishing that circumstances were different, that her heart was not still bruised from Patrick's rejection, that she could approach this new possibility with clarity rather than confusion. "I shall write to you," David promised as he took his leave, "and perhaps visit if my presence would not be unwelcome. "It would be most welcome," Charlotte assured him, surprised by the sincerity in her own voice. As the carriage bore her away from London later that day, Charlotte opened David's parcel to find not only the promised books, but also a pressed flower, a forget-me-not, placed carefully between the pages of one volume. The simple gesture spoke volumes, bringing unexpected tears to her eyes and a small tentative smile to her lips. Bath welcomed Charlotte with its elegant sandstone buildings and slower pace of life. Eleanor's townhouse near the Royal Crescent provided a peaceful sanctuary, her cousin's no-nonsense attitude and dry humour offering exactly the kind of companionship Charlotte needed. "So," Eleanor said on Charlotte's first evening, as they sat before the fire with glasses of sherry, "tell me about this Marquis who has sent you fleeing to the provinces." Charlotte hesitated, still uncomfortable discussing Patrick's rejection. But Eleanor's direct gaze and genuine concern eventually loosened her tongue, and she found herself relating the entire painful episode. "The insufferable cad," Eleanor declared when Charlotte had finished. "To speak so callously to any woman, let alone one of your sensibility and accomplishments. You are well rid of him, my dear, though I understand the heart is not easily convinced of what the mind knows to be true." "Indeed," Charlotte agreed softly, "though each day brings a little more clarity. And what of this Duke who has been so attentive? Your Aunt Millicent mentioned him in her letter, with significant underlining, I might add." Charlotte felt a blush warm her cheeks. "His Grace has been most kind." "Kind, is it?" Eleanor's eyes twinkled knowingly. "In my experience, when a duke takes particular interest in a young lady's well-being, kind is rarely the whole story." "It is not like that," Charlotte protested, though not with complete conviction. "The Duke of Ashford is different. He sees beyond the surface, values substance over appearance. His attention feels genuine in a way that Lord Whitmore's never truly did, though I was too blinded to recognize it." "Then perhaps this sojourn in Bath will prove beneficial in more ways than one," Eleanor suggested. "Distance often brings perspective, particularly in matters of the heart." The first 2 weeks of Charlotte's stay passed in quiet routine. Mornings were spent taking the waters at the pump room, afternoons devoted to walks or visits to the shops, evenings occupied with reading or conversation with Eleanor. The respite from London's social whirl allowed Charlotte's wounded spirit to begin the slow process of healing. David's letters arrived with flattering regularity, each one thoughtful and engaging, without applying any pressure or expectation. He shared observations about books they had both read, described interesting encounters from his daily life, and asked questions that demonstrated genuine interest in her thoughts and experiences. Charlotte found herself looking forward to his correspondence with increasing eagerness, taking care with her replies in a way she never had with Patrick's more showy attentions. It was during her 3rd week in Bath that Charlotte received a letter from Lady Millicent containing disturbing news. Lord Whitmore had been caught in a compromising position with Lady Sophia Harrington by her elderly husband. A duel was rumoured to be imminent, and all of London society was abuzz with the scandal. Charlotte read the letter with a curious detachment, as though it described events happening to strangers rather than to a man who had so recently held her heart. She was surprised to discover that her predominant emotion was not jealousy or renewed hurt, but rather a sense of vindication, and more surprisingly, gratitude. Had Patrick accepted her love, she might now be facing the humiliation of a husband publicly exposed as an adulterer. "You seem lost in thought," Eleanor observed as they strolled through the botanical gardens later that day. "Is it still the Marquis?" Charlotte sighed, watching a pair of butterflies dance among the roses. "Less and less each day, I find. It is rather the mortification of having been so thoroughly deceived, both by him and by my own heart. I believed his interest to be genuine when it was clearly motivated by practical considerations." "Hearts can be remarkably resilient when given the chance," Eleanor replied, "and remarkably wise the second time around." "The Duke of Ashford continues to write, I notice," Eleanor remarked, her shrewd eyes missing nothing. 3 letters this week alone." Charlotte felt a blush warm her cheeks. "He is a faithful correspondent." "And a faithful admirer, I suspect," Eleanor added with a knowing smile. "His letters seem to bring you more happiness than anything else these days." Before Charlotte could formulate a response, they were interrupted by the arrival of a messenger boy, bearing yet another letter, this one not from David, but from Lady Millicent in London. Charlotte broke the seal with trepidation, which quickly turned to dismay as she read her aunt's words. "What is it?" Eleanor asked, noting her cousin's troubled expression. Aunt Millicent writes that Lord Whitmore has been involved in a scandal, Charlotte explained, her voice hollow. He was caught in a compromising position with Lady Sophia Harrington. Her husband has challenged him to a duel. Eleanor let out a most unladylike snort. The man clearly lacks both honor and discretion. You had a fortunate escape, my dear. Charlotte nodded slowly, surprised to find that the news affected her far less than it would have just weeks before. Aunt also mentions that she has informed the Duke of Ashford of my extended stay in Bath. She seems to think he may call upon me here. Would that displease you? Eleanor asked, studying Charlotte's face carefully. No, Charlotte admitted, a small smile playing at her lips. It would not displease me at all. 2 days later, as Charlotte sat reading in the morning room, Eleanor's butler announced an unexpected visitor. His Grace, the Duke of Ashford, he proclaimed as David entered the room. Charlotte rose quickly, her book forgotten. Your Grace, I had no idea you were in Bath. David's smile was warm as he bowed over her hand. I found London increasingly tedious without your company, Charlotte. When your aunt mentioned your extended stay here, I discovered pressing business that required my immediate attention in the area. His eyes, filled with gentle humor, told her he was well aware of the transparency of his excuse. Charlotte found herself returning his smile with genuine pleasure. How fortunate that your business should bring you to Bath of all places. Fortune had very little to do with it, I assure you, David replied, his candor refreshing after months of Patrick's calculated charm. With Eleanor's blessing, David began to call upon Charlotte daily. They explored Bath together, visiting the Roman baths, attending concerts at the assembly rooms and taking long walks along the Royal Crescent. In his company, Charlotte discovered a new kind of happiness, not the feverish excitement she had felt with Patrick, but something deeper and more sustaining. You seem different, David observed one afternoon as they sat in the pump room, watching the fashionable visitors take the waters. More at peace, perhaps. Charlotte considered his words carefully. I believe I am. Bath has been good for my spirit, as has the company I've kept. I am glad to hear it, David replied, his expression softening. Your happiness matters greatly to me, Charlotte. There was a quiet sincerity in his voice that touched her deeply. Unlike Patrick, whose compliments had always seemed designed to achieve a particular effect, David spoke from the heart, expecting nothing in return. As the weeks passed, Charlotte found herself increasingly drawn to the Duke's steady presence. She began to notice things about him she had previously overlooked, the crinkles at the corners of his eyes when he laughed, the gentle way he assisted elderly visitors at the pump room, his boundless curiosity about the world and the people in it. One rainy afternoon, as they sought shelter in the Bath Abbey, Charlotte finally gave voice to a question that had long puzzled her. Why did you continue to seek my company in London, when it was so obvious my attention was elsewhere? David was silent for a moment, watching the raindrops trace patterns on the stained glass windows. Because even when your eyes were turned toward another, I saw in you qualities that I admired deeply, your kindness, your intelligence, your quiet strength. Those things were worth waiting for, even if your heart might never turn my way. Charlotte was deeply moved by his words. And now? What do you see when you look at me now? David turned to face her fully, his expression open and vulnerable. I see a woman who has endured pain with dignity, who has grown wiser without becoming bitter, whose heart has somehow become even more beautiful for having been broken. I see the woman I have loved since the moment we met, though I scarcely dared hope you might ever return those feelings. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. This was so different from Patrick's cold proposal. This honest declaration offered with no expectations, only truth. David, she whispered, her heart racing with a new and different kind of excitement. I believe I am finally beginning to see clearly. He took her hand in his touch gentle yet sure. Then may I hope, Charlotte. May I hope that one day you might look upon me with something more than friendship. Charlotte gazed into his eyes, finding there everything Patrick's had lacked: constancy, respect, and genuine affection. I believe that day may be closer than either of us anticipated, she replied softly. The joy that illuminated David's face in that moment was unlike anything Charlotte had ever witnessed, pure and unguarded, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a storm. As they walked back to Eleanor's townhouse through the rain-washed streets, Charlotte felt as though she were emerging from a long winter into the first warm days of spring. Her heart, so long fixated on Patrick Baskerville, was finally opening to the possibility of a deeper, truer love, one based not on fleeting passion or social advantage, but on mutual respect and genuine affection. The joy that illuminated David's face in that moment was unlike anything Charlotte had ever witnessed, pure and unguarded, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a storm. As they walked back to Eleanor's townhouse through the rain-washed streets, Charlotte felt as though she were emerging from a long winter into the first warm days of spring. Her heart, so long fixated on Patrick Baskerville, was finally opening to the possibility of a deeper, truer love, one based not on fleeting passion or social advantage, but on mutual respect and genuine affection. That evening, a letter arrived from London bearing more news about the scandal involving Lord Whitmore. He had survived the duel with Lord Harrington, though not without injury. More surprisingly, he had announced his intention to travel abroad indefinitely, effectively removing himself from the London social scene at the height of the season. Charlotte read the letter with a curious detachment, as though it described events in the life of a stranger rather than a man who had once held her heart in his careless hands. "Does the news affect you greatly?" David asked when she shared the contents with him during his call the following day. Charlotte considered the question thoughtfully. "It affects me, yes, but not in the way it once would have. I find I can wish him well without wishing him back in my life." David's smile was understanding. "That, I believe, is the truest form of healing." As autumn deepened around them, Bath's elegant Georgian architecture took on a golden hue in the late afternoon sunlight. Charlotte and David established a comfortable routine, their daily encounters becoming the highlight of her stay. Eleanor observed their growing attachment with approving eyes, though she was careful not to press Charlotte on the matter. "Some things must unfold at their own pace," she remarked one evening after David had taken his leave, "particularly matters of the heart." Indeed, Charlotte found that her feelings for the Duke were developing in a way entirely different from her infatuation with Patrick. Where that attachment had been swift and consuming, leaving little room for reason or reflection, her regard for David grew steadily, built on countless small moments of shared understanding and mutual respect. She came to treasure his thoughtfulness, how he always remembered which authors she enjoyed, how he noticed when she was tired and suggested they sit rather than continue walking, how he listened to her opinions with genuine interest rather than polite forbearance. These qualities, which she had once overlooked in her fascination with Patrick's more dramatic charm, now revealed themselves as the true foundation of lasting affection. One golden afternoon in late October, David took Charlotte on a drive to the countryside surrounding Bath. The rolling hills were ablaze with autumn colour, the air crisp and invigorating as they walked along a ridge overlooking the city in the distance. "I have received a letter from my estate manager," David said as they paused to admire the view. "There are matters requiring my attention at Ashford Park. I must return to Hampshire within the week." Charlotte felt a pang of disappointment. "I see. Will you be away long?" "That depends," he replied, his voice carefully neutral, "on whether I might persuade you to consider a change of scenery yourself." Charlotte turned to him, puzzled. "I don't understand." David took both her hands in his expression earnest. "Charlotte, these weeks in Bath have been the happiest of my life. Each day in your company has only deepened my admiration and affection for you. I had resolved to be patient, to give your heart the time it needed to heal completely before speaking, but the prospect of separation compels me to honesty." He drew a deep breath before continuing. "I love you, Charlotte Brandon. I have loved you since that first evening we danced together, when you looked past me toward another man. I love your kindness, your intelligence, your quiet dignity in the face of pain. I love the person you have become even more than the person you were when we met." Charlotte stood transfixed, the sincerity in his eyes leaving no room for doubt. "I am asking you to do me the great honor of becoming my wife," David said softly. "Not because society expects it, or because it would be advantageous, but because I believe we could build a life of genuine happiness together. If you need more time, I will wait. If your heart is not yet ready, I will understand. But I could not leave without telling you the truth of my feelings. The contrast with Patrick's cold, practical proposal could not have been more stark. Where the Marquis had offered everything but his heart, the Duke offered his heart above all else." Charlotte felt tears gathering in her eyes, not from pain this time, but from a welling up of emotion she had not known herself capable of feeling again. "David," she whispered, "I do not need more time." Hope dawned in his eyes. "You don't?" "No," she said, her voice growing stronger. "What began as gratitude for your kindness has grown into something I scarcely dared name, even to myself. I was so afraid of being wrong again, of mistaking infatuation for love. But this feels nothing like what I felt for Patrick. It's deeper, calmer, yet somehow more powerful." David's hands tightened around hers. "Are you saying, 'I love you'?" Charlotte said, the words bringing with them a sense of rightness and peace. "Not as a girl loves a romantic notion, but as a woman loves a man she respects and admires above all others. Yes, David Percy, I will marry you, with all my heart." The joy that transformed his features was matched by the radiance of her own smile as he drew her into his arms. Their first kiss, shared on that windswept hillside with the autumn landscape spread before them, sealed a promise that had been months in the making. A promise not of convenience or advantage, but of genuine love and partnership. When they returned to Eleanor's townhouse, flushed with happiness and plans for the future, her cousin took one look at their faces and laughed with delight. "Well, it seems congratulations are in order," she declared, embracing Charlotte warmly. "Though I must say it's about time. I was beginning to fear I would need to lock you two in the conservatory to force a declaration." "You knew?" Charlotte asked, surprised. "My dear girl, anyone with eyes could see the way he looked at you," Eleanor replied. "And more recently, the way you looked at him. Love may be blind in poetry, but in real life, it's remarkably visible to everyone except occasionally the lovers themselves." The following days passed in a happy blur as preparations were made for their return to London. David, with Charlotte's consent, wrote to Lady Millicent to formally request her hand, while Charlotte composed her own letter, explaining the circumstances of their engagement. "She will be delighted," Charlotte predicted as they sealed the letters. A duke trumps a marquis in her social calculations, regardless of any romantic notions. "And what of your own romantic notions?" David asked with a smile. "Have I satisfied those adequately?" Charlotte pretended to consider the question seriously. "Well, you failed to slay any dragons or scale any towers to reach me, but I suppose declaring your love against the backdrop of the English countryside will suffice." David laughed, drawing her close. "If it's dragons you want, I fear Bath is sadly lacking in such creatures, though I did once confront a particularly fearsome dowager at Almack's who had spoken unkindly of you." "Did you indeed?" Charlotte asked, touched by this revelation. "I may be a gentleman, but I'm not without my moments of gallantry," he replied with mock seriousness. "Lady Harrington never dared criticize your choice of ribbons again." The mention of Lady Harrington inevitably brought to mind Patrick and his scandal, but Charlotte found the memory no longer held power to wound her. Instead, she felt a strange sense of gratitude, not for the pain he had caused, but for the clarity that had eventually emerged from it. "It's curious," she mused, as they sat together in Eleanor's drawing room on the evening before their departure. "Had Patrick not rejected me so cruelly, I might never have truly seen you, David. I might have continued to mistake infatuation for love, never discovering what real love actually feels like." "Then I must owe Lord Whitmore a debt of thanks," David replied, "though I confess it was difficult to feel charitable toward him at the time. Watching you suffer was its own special form of torment." Charlotte squeezed his hand. "No more torment for either of us, I hope. Only happiness from this day forward." "I shall do everything in my power to ensure it," he promised. Their return to London created the expected sensation in society. Lady Millicent, true to Charlotte's prediction, was beside herself with joy at the prospect of her niece becoming a duchess. The engagement was announced formally at a small dinner party at Ravenscroft House, followed by a notice in the Morning Post that set tongues wagging throughout the ton. "Have you heard?" whispered one matron to another at Lady Pembroke's musical evening. "Miss Brandon is to marry the Duke of Ashford. After being jilted by Lord Whitmore, no less. What a remarkable recovery." "I always thought she aimed too high with Whitmore," her companion replied, "though I must say she's landed on her feet rather spectacularly. From Marquis to Duke, quite the social elevation." Charlotte, overhearing such comments, found them more amusing than hurtful. Let society think what it would. She knew the truth of her own heart. The weeks leading up to Christmas were filled with preparations for both the wedding and Charlotte's transition to her new life, as Duchess of Ashford. David's London house was opened and readied, his country estate prepared for their eventual arrival, and settlements drawn up that were remarkably generous toward Charlotte. "You need change nothing if you don't wish to," David assured her as they discussed the running of his households. "The staff at both houses are excellent, and they will follow your direction in all things." "I should like to learn, though," Charlotte replied thoughtfully, "to understand how everything works before making any changes. A partnership should be equal, even if society doesn't always see it that way." David's expression softened with pride and affection. "You will make a remarkable Duchess, Charlotte Brandon, not because of your title, but because of who you are." As their wedding day approached, Charlotte found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past year. From the shattered dreams of her infatuation with Patrick to the deep contentment of her love for David, every step, even the painful ones, had been necessary to bring her to this place of certainty and joy. The night before her wedding, as Eleanor helped her prepare for bed one final time as Miss Charlotte Brandon, her cousin asked a question that gave her pause. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if Lord Whitmore had returned your affections?" Charlotte considered this seriously. "I used to in those first awful days after his rejection, but now, I can only be grateful that he did not pretend to feelings he didn't have. Had he done so, I might now be trapped in a marriage without love, never knowing the happiness I've found with David." Eleanor nodded, satisfied. "Good. That's as it should be. The past has its place, but on the eve of your wedding, your thoughts should be only of the future, and the man who will be waiting for you at the altar tomorrow." Indeed, as Charlotte drifted to sleep that night, her dreams were filled not with might-have-beens, but with visions of the life stretching before her, a life built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and the quiet certainty that her heart had finally found its true home. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, a perfect December morning with frost sparkling on the bare branches outside her window. Charlotte awoke with a sense of calm anticipation, the nervousness she had expected conspicuously absent. In its place was a deep certainty that felt like stepping onto solid ground after months of shifting sand. Her wedding gown, a creation of ivory silk with delicate pearl embroidery, had been the subject of much consultation with the modiste. Now, as her maid carefully helped her into it, Charlotte was pleased with its elegant simplicity, a reflection of the authentic love it represented, rather than the social spectacle marriage so often became among the ton. "You look absolutely radiant, my dear," Lady Millicent declared, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief as she entered the dressing room. "I have never seen a more beautiful bride." For once, Charlotte could accept her aunt's praise without reservation. The woman who gazed back at her from the mirror did indeed glow with happiness, her eyes bright with joyful anticipation, rather than the nervous excitement she had once imagined feeling on her wedding day. "It is time," announced Eleanor, who had travelled from Bath to serve as Charlotte's matron of honour. "Are you ready?" Charlotte nodded, a perfect calm settling over her. "More ready than I have ever been for anything in my life." The ceremony at St. George's, Hanover Square, was everything Charlotte had hoped for, solemn yet joyful, traditional yet deeply personal. As she walked down the aisle on her uncle's arm, her gaze fixed immediately on David, standing tall and distinguished at the altar. The expression that transformed his face as he beheld his bride, wonder, pride, and pure, unguarded love, brought tears to Charlotte's eyes and a certainty to her heart that no doubts could ever penetrate. Their vows, spoken in clear, steady voices that carried throughout the church, were not merely social formalities, but sacred promises they both intended to honor for a lifetime. When David slipped the wedding ring onto her finger, a band of gold set with small diamonds that had belonged to his grandmother, Charlotte felt the rightness of it deep in her soul. This was no compromise, no settling for second best, but the culmination of a journey that had led her exactly where she was meant to be. "I present to you the Duke and Duchess of Ashford," announced the bishop as they turned to face the congregation. The applause that filled the church seemed distant to Charlotte, far less important than the gentle pressure of David's hand holding hers, the warmth in his eyes as he smiled down at her, and the knowledge that they were beginning a life together built on the firmest foundation of all, genuine love and mutual respect. As they emerged from the church amid a shower of rose petals and well-wishes, Charlotte caught a glimpse of a familiar figure standing near the back of the crowd, Patrick Baskerville, his expression unreadable as he watched the newly wedded couple. For a brief moment their eyes met across the distance, Charlotte felt no triumph, no desire to flaunt her happiness before the man who had once rejected her so cruelly. Instead, she offered a small, genuine smile, not of forgiveness exactly, but of acknowledgement that his actions, however painful at the time, had ultimately led her to true happiness. Patrick inclined his head slightly in response, before turning away, disappearing into the crowd as Charlotte's attention was drawn back to her husband and the celebrations that awaited them. The wedding breakfast at Ashford House was a glittering affair, attended by the cream of London society. Charlotte moved through the crowd on David's arm, accepting congratulations with gracious smiles, yet always aware of his presence beside her, like a compass pointing true north. "Are you happy, my love?" David murmured during a brief moment alone in the garden conservatory, where they had stolen away for a breath of privacy. Charlotte reached up to touch his face, her heart overflowing with emotion. "Beyond all measure," she whispered. "I never knew it was possible to feel such complete joy." David turned his head to press a kiss into her palm. "When I think how close I came to losing you, you never would have lost me," Charlotte assured him. "Even when I could not see it myself, my heart was finding its way to you." He smiled, drawing her closer. "My patient heart was always waiting for yours to catch up." As evening fell and the last guests departed, Charlotte stood with David in the entrance hall of what was now her home. The future stretched before them, filled with promise and possibility. Yet in that moment it was the present that held her attention, the warm strength of her husband's hand holding hers, the love in his eyes as he gazed down at her, and the knowledge that this was only the beginning of their story together. "Welcome home, Duchess," David said softly, lifting her hand to his lips. Charlotte smiled, her heart full. "Home," she repeated, savoring the word and all it now meant. "Yes, I believe it is." As evening fell and the last wedding guests departed, Charlotte stood with David in the entrance hall of what was now her home. The future stretched before them, filled with promise and possibility. Yet in that moment, it was the present that held her attention. The warm strength of her husband's hand holding hers, the love in his eyes as he gazed down at her, and the knowledge that this was only the beginning of their story together. "Welcome home, Duchess," David said softly, lifting her hand to his lips. Charlotte smiled, her heart full. "Home," she repeated, savoring the word and all it now meant. "Yes, I believe it is." News of Charlotte Brandon's marriage to the Duke of Ashford travelled swiftly through London society and beyond, carried by letters and gossip to the farthest corners of Europe, including the distant shores where Patrick Baskerville had sought refuge from scandal. For months the Marquis had wandered through the great cities of the continent, Paris, Vienna, Rome, seeking distraction in new scenery and novel companions. Yet none had succeeded in banishing the strange emptiness that had settled within him since his departure from England. It was in a small cafe in Florence that he first heard detailed tidings of the wedding, delivered casually by a fellow expatriate who had received correspondence from home. "The Brandon-Ashford wedding was apparently the event of the season," the gentleman remarked, unaware of the significance the names held for Patrick. "They say the bride looked positively radiant, transformed by happiness according to my sister's letter. Quite a brilliant match for the family, though I suppose becoming a duchess is always cause for celebration." Patrick's hand stilled, the cup of espresso halfway to his lips. "The wedding has already taken place, then?" "Indeed, just before Christmas. Were you acquainted with either family?" "Somewhat," Patrick replied vaguely, his mind suddenly flooded with images of Charlotte, her gentle smile, her intelligent conversation, the adoration in her eyes that he had so carelessly dismissed. That night, alone in his luxurious hotel suite, Patrick found himself haunted by these memories. For the first time, he allowed himself to truly contemplate what he had lost in rejecting her love. It had been easy at the time to convince himself that his feelings for Lady Sophia were the great passion of his life, worth risking scandal and even death for. Yet Sophia had abandoned him the moment her husband discovered their affair, protesting that Patrick had misunderstood her intentions and that she had never contemplated leaving her elderly husband for a mere Marquis, regardless of his charms. The humiliation of that rejection, combined with the wound he had sustained in the duel, had driven Patrick from England. Now, months later, he could see his infatuation with Sophia for what it had been, shallow and self-destructive, a poor substitute for the genuine affection Charlotte had offered him. "I will never love you," he had told her with such cruel certainty. How could he have been so blind, so arrogant, so utterly wrong? By morning, Patrick had made his decision. He would return to England immediately. The news of Charlotte's marriage had struck him with an unexpected force, awakening feelings he had not known himself capable of experiencing. Though she was now lost to him forever, as the Duchess of Ashford, he felt compelled to see her once more, to witness for himself the happiness she had found, and perhaps in some small way to make amends for his cruelty. The journey back to London was interminable, each mile increasing Patrick's determination to confront the consequences of his actions. He arrived in early February to find the city in the full swing of the winter season. Everywhere he went, conversations buzzed with talk of the newly wedded Duke and Duchess of Ashford, who had apparently delayed their wedding trip to the continent until spring in favour of establishing themselves in London society immediately. Patrick's first glimpse of Charlotte came unexpectedly as he rode through Hyde Park one crisp afternoon. She was walking arm in arm with the Duke, her face tilted up toward his with an expression of such pure joy that Patrick felt physically winded by the sight. Gone was the wistful vulnerability he remembered. In its place was a confident radiance that transformed her from merely beautiful to breathtaking. The Duke, for his part, gazed at Charlotte as though she were the most precious thing in all creation, with a tenderness and respect that made Patrick's cavalier treatment of her seem all the more shameful by comparison. He watched them from a distance, unobserved, his heart constricting painfully in his chest. This was not the Charlotte he had known, or thought he had known. This was a woman in full possession of herself, her happiness evident in every graceful movement. Still, Patrick could not abandon his purpose. That very evening he presented himself at Ashford House, the Duke's London residence. The butler's expression upon announcing him made it clear that his arrival was neither expected nor particularly welcome, but Patrick was beyond caring about social niceties. Charlotte received him in the drawing room, her composure perfect, though a slight pallor beneath her cheeks betrayed her shock at his sudden appearance. "Lord Whitmore," she greeted him with a formal curtsy. "This is an unexpected surprise. I had heard you were abroad." Patrick bowed deeply. "Your Grace, you are looking well. More than well. Radiant, in fact." A faint blush coloured her cheeks, but her gaze remained steady. "Thank you. I trust your travels were illuminating?" "In more ways than I could have anticipated," Patrick replied, searching her face for any sign of the devotion that had once been so plainly written there. "I have returned a changed man, Charlotte." Her eyebrow arched slightly at his use of her given name. "Indeed, I am glad to hear it. We all benefit from opportunities for growth and reflection." Her politeness was maddening, so different from the emotional young woman who had once worn her heart so openly in his presence. Patrick took a step closer, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur. "I made a terrible mistake, Charlotte. The words I spoke to you that day, they haunt me still. I was a fool, blind to the treasure that stood before me." Charlotte's expression softened slightly, but not with the rekindled affection he had hoped for. Instead, it was compassion that filled her eyes, the kind one might offer a child who has learned a difficult lesson. "We all make mistakes, Lord Whitmore. The important thing is that we learn from them." "I have learned," Patrick insisted, reaching for her hand. "I have learned that what I once dismissed as unimportant, constancy, sincerity, genuine affection, are in fact the only things that matter. I have learned that I was wrong when I said I could never love you. I do love you, Charlotte. I love you with a depth that astonishes me." Charlotte gently withdrew her hand from his grasp. "Your timing is unfortunate, my lord. As you must know, I am now the Duchess of Ashford. My heart and my hand belong to my husband." "Marriages can be—" Patrick began desperately. "Do not say it," Charlotte interrupted, her voice suddenly firm. "Do not dishonor yourself further by suggesting what I know you were about to suggest. My marriage is not merely a legal contract or a social arrangement. It is the most sacred promise of my life, made to a man I love completely." Patrick felt as though he had been struck. "You cannot mean that. The way you looked at me once, the love in your eyes—" "Was real," Charlotte acknowledged, "but it was not lasting. True love, I have discovered, is not merely about passion or admiration from afar. It is about being truly seen and valued for who you are. David has given me that gift, and I could no more return to what I once felt for you than I could return to childhood after experiencing the fullness of adulthood." The truth of her words was undeniable, yet Patrick found himself unable to accept them. At least grant me the opportunity to prove myself changed. Allow me to court your friendship, if nothing else." Charlotte shook her head, her expression gentle but resolute. "My heart is not a pendulum, Lord Whitmore, swinging back and forth at the merest touch. It has found its home with David, and there it shall remain." "You speak as though love is a choice," Patrick protested. "The truest love is both feeling and choice," Charlotte replied with quiet certainty. "I chose David, with my heart and my mind in perfect accord." Patrick stared at her, realizing with growing despair that the woman before him was indeed lost to him, not because she was married to another, but because she had outgrown the need for his approval or affection. The Charlotte who had loved him so devotedly was gone, replaced by this self-possessed woman whose happiness no longer depended on his regard. "I see," he said at last, his voice hollow. "I have truly lost you then." "You cannot lose what was never truly yours," Charlotte replied softly. "But you have not lost the opportunity to find happiness elsewhere, with someone whose heart is free to love you as you deserve to be loved." Patrick laughed bitterly. "As I deserve. After the way I treated you, I hardly think I deserve anyone's love." "We all deserve love, Lord Whitmore," Charlotte said with unexpected gentleness. "But we must also be worthy of it. Perhaps that is the lesson you were meant to learn." The sound of approaching footsteps in the hallway drew their attention. A moment later, the Duke of Ashford entered the drawing room, his expression betraying momentary surprise at the sight of Patrick before settling into polite neutrality. "Lord Whitmore," he greeted with a formal bow, "I had heard you had returned to London." "Your Grace," Patrick replied stiffly, "I was just congratulating the Duchess on your marriage." David crossed the room to stand beside Charlotte, his hand coming to rest protectively at the small of her back. The gesture was subtle yet unmistakably possessive, a silent claim that did not go unnoticed by Patrick. "How kind of you," David responded, his tone courteous, though his eyes remained watchful. "Charlotte and I have been blessed with good wishes from all quarters." Charlotte leaned almost imperceptibly into David's touch, drawing strength from his presence. "Lord Whitmore was just leaving, I believe," she said, her gaze meeting Patrick's with gentle finality. Defeated, Patrick bowed to them both. "Indeed. I wish you every happiness in your marriage, Your Grace." As he turned to leave, Charlotte's voice stopped him. "Lord Whitmore." "Patrick." He glanced back, a flicker of hope rekindling at her use of his given name. "I truly do wish you well," she said sincerely. "I hope you find what you are seeking." The kindness in her words was somehow more devastating than anger would have been. Patrick nodded once, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat, and departed. Outside, the first snowflakes of winter had begun to fall, dusting the streets of London with their cold purity. Patrick stood for a long moment on the pavement, watching the lights of carriages passing through the growing darkness. Through the window, he caught a glimpse of Charlotte and David, their heads bent close together in intimate conversation, their expressions softened by a love so tangible it seemed to illuminate them from within. The sight filled Patrick with an ache that was part envy, part regret, and, unexpectedly, part acceptance. Charlotte had moved beyond the pain he had caused her. She had found happiness, true happiness, with a man who cherished her as Patrick had failed to do, and in that moment, despite his own broken heart, he could not bring himself to wish it otherwise. In the weeks that followed, Patrick withdrew from London society, finding its gossip and superficial pleasures suddenly hollow. He spent hours in his library, reading the books Charlotte had once discussed with such intelligence and passion, seeing them now through different eyes. He began corresponding with his estate manager in Scotland, making plans to visit the property he had neglected for years. It was at Lady Eleanor Winthrop's literary salon, which he attended on impulse one Thursday evening, that Patrick encountered Miss Rebecca Harrison. She was not a conventional beauty, but there was something striking about her dark eyes and the intelligence they reflected as she contributed thoughtfully to a discussion about Mary Shelley's works. "You make an interesting point about the creature's fundamental humanity," Patrick found himself saying. Few readers look beyond the horror elements to see the profound questions Shelley raises about what truly makes us human. Rebecca turned toward him, surprise and then recognition dawning in her expression. "Lord Whitmore, I didn't expect to see you at a literary gathering." "I am attempting to broaden my intellectual horizons," he replied with a self-deprecating smile, "though I fear I am woefully behind in my reading." "It is never too late to begin," she observed. The greatest journey starts with a single step, as they say. There was something refreshing about her forthright manner. No coyness, no calculated charm, just honest conversation between equals. For the first time in months, Patrick found himself genuinely engaged. As the evening progressed, he discovered that Miss Harrison served as companion to Lady Winthrop, that she had a passion for natural philosophy as well as literature, and that she harbored no illusions about the limitations society placed on women of intelligence but modest means. "You are remarkably insightful for one so young," Patrick commented as they discussed the changing social landscape of England. "Not so very young, my lord," she replied with a hint of amusement. 27 is practically ancient in the marriage market, and yet you remain unwed." "By choice," she answered simply. "I would rather independence than a marriage without mutual respect and affection." Patrick found himself intrigued by her forthright manner. A radical notion. "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but one I suspect the new Duchess of Ashford would understand. She chose true happiness over mere position, after all." The mention of Charlotte might once have pained him, but Patrick found he could now think of her with a curious mixture of regret and gratitude. She did indeed, and society is beginning to follow her example, I think. The old ways of arranging marriages solely for advantage seem increasingly outdated. "Progress comes slowly," Rebecca observed, "but it does come. Each generation builds upon the foundations laid by those who came before." As the salon drew to a close, Patrick found himself reluctant to end their conversation. "Would you permit me to call upon you, Miss Harrison? I have greatly enjoyed our discussion." Rebecca studied him thoughtfully. "Lady Winthrop hosts these gatherings every Thursday when in London. You would be welcome to continue our conversation next week." It was not the eager acceptance he might once have expected from a woman of her station, but Patrick found her measured response refreshing, rather than disappointing. "Then I shall look forward to Thursday with great anticipation." Over the following weeks, Patrick became a regular attendee at Lady Winthrop's salon, his conversations with Rebecca Harrison growing increasingly wide-ranging and personal. He found in her something he had never truly valued before, an intellectual equal, whose perspective challenged and expanded his own. One afternoon in early spring, Patrick encountered Charlotte and David in the British Museum, where he had gone with Rebecca to view a new exhibition of classical artifacts. The four acknowledged each other with polite greetings, the initial awkwardness giving way to a civil conversation about the exhibition. Patrick observed with interest how David deferred to Charlotte's knowledge of Greek mythology, his pride in her intellect evident in every glance. More striking still was the easy companionship between them, the small touches, the shared smiles, the wordless communication of a couple truly attuned to one another. "They seem very happy," Rebecca commented quietly as they moved on to the next gallery. "They are," Patrick agreed, surprised to find he could say it without pain. "She deserves nothing less." Rebecca glanced at him curiously. "You knew her well?" "I thought I did," Patrick replied honestly, "but I failed to see her true worth until it was too late. And now? Now I am learning to see people, truly see them, for the first time in my life," he said, his gaze meeting hers with new clarity. "It is a humbling but necessary education." Rebecca's smile held a warmth that kindled something hopeful in Patrick's heart. The best educations often are. As spring blossomed fully across London, Patrick found himself at a crossroads. His estates in Scotland still awaited his attention, yet the prospect of leaving London and Rebecca grew increasingly unappealing. Their relationship had developed into something neither had anticipated, a friendship built on mutual respect that had gradually, almost imperceptibly, deepened into something more. It was during a walk in Kensington Gardens, the air fragrant with lilacs and new growth, that Patrick finally gave voice to feelings he had been nurturing for weeks. "I will be traveling to Scotland soon," he began, watching Rebecca's profile as she admired a particularly fine magnolia tree. "So you have mentioned," she replied. "Your tenants will be glad of your attention, I imagine." "Yes, I believe they will." Patrick hesitated, then continued with newfound directness. "I find, however, that I am reluctant to leave London, or rather to leave certain company I have come to value most highly." Rebecca turned to face him, her expression guarded yet hopeful. "Lord Whitmore—" "Patrick," he corrected gently. "After all our conversations, I think we might dispense with formalities between us." Patrick, she amended, the sound of his name on her lips sending a pleasant warmth through him. What exactly are you saying? I am saying that I have found in you something I never truly understood the value of before, a companion who challenges my mind, broadens my perspective, and brings joy to my days through her presence alone. I am saying that the thought of Scotland without you seems suddenly bleak, despite its natural beauty. Rebecca's eyes widened slightly. Are you suggesting? I am suggesting nothing improper, Patrick assured her quickly. Rather, I am asking if you might consider a proper courtship between us. I have changed, Rebecca, or perhaps more accurately, I am changing still. The man I was a year ago would not have recognized the value of a woman of substance over mere beauty or status. The man I am becoming hopes he might be worthy of such a woman's regard. A slow smile spread across Rebecca's face, transforming it with a beauty that came from within. You speak of worthiness, yet you fail to consider whether you might already have gained that regard without realizing it. Hope bloomed in Patrick's chest. Have I? You have, she confirmed simply, though I would caution that regard is only the beginning of a journey, not its destination. A journey I would be honored to undertake, Patrick replied, his voice fervent with newfound purpose. If you will walk it with me. As they continued their stroll, now with Rebecca's hand tucked into the crook of his arm, Patrick reflected on the extraordinary path that had led him to this moment. His cruel rejection of Charlotte, which had seemed so justified at the time, had set in motion a chain of events that ultimately forced him to confront his own failings. The pain he had caused her had returned to him tenfold, yet from that suffering had emerged a humility and self-awareness he might never have achieved otherwise. Charlotte had found her happiness with a man worthy of her love. Now perhaps Patrick was taking the first steps toward becoming a man worthy of love himself, not through grand gestures or passionate declarations, but through the slower, more challenging process of genuine growth and change. The following week, an invitation arrived at Patrick's London residence, an elegant card requesting his presence at a garden party hosted by the Duke and Duchess of Ashford at their country estate. The personal note from Charlotte on the back read simply, "We would be pleased to welcome you and Miss Harrison, should she wish to accompany you. Sincerely, Charlotte." Patrick stood by the window, the invitation in his hand, watching the spring sunshine gild the London streets with golden light. A year ago, he had uttered those fateful words to Charlotte, "I will never love you," never imagining how completely life would prove him wrong. Not only had he come to love her, too late to claim her, but he had also discovered the capacity for a different, perhaps deeper love, one built on genuine appreciation rather than superficial attraction. "I will never love you," the Marquis had once declared with cruel certainty. But time and reflection had taught him the most valuable lesson of his life, that true love begins not with grand passion, but with seeing, truly seeing, the worth of another soul, and allowing oneself to be transformed by that recognition. As Patrick carefully penned his acceptance of the invitation, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. Charlotte had found her happiness with a man who cherished her as she deserved. And perhaps in time he might find his own happiness, with a woman whose quiet strength and keen mind had awakened in him something he had never expected to feel. A love born not of blind infatuation, but of genuine respect and admiration. The circle was complete. The heart that had once been too proud to love had been humbled, then healed, then opened to new possibilities. And in that opening lay the promise of a future far richer than Patrick Baskerville, Marquis of Whitmore, had ever dared to imagine for himself. The end, dear listener. There are moments in life when we are made to feel forgotten, when someone we care about turns cold, speaks without kindness, or chooses someone else, not because we lacked anything, but because they couldn't see what was right in front of them. Charlotte once faced this too. She gave her heart to a man who saw her as a solution, not as a soul, and when he told her he would never love her, it nearly broke her. But time, as it often does, brought her something better, a love that arrived not with grand promises, but with quiet respect and unwavering presence. So if life has ever made you feel like someone overlooked your worth, please remember, how others treat us often says more about their emptiness than our value. You are not defined by who walked away, but by how you continued on to be, with dignity, courage, and hope. Every disappointment holds a lesson. Every silence teaches you to listen to your own heart. And sometimes, the greatest love story of your life begins after the one that broke you. So tonight, as you rest, may peace come gently. May you feel protected, seen, and deeply cherished, not just by others, but by yourself. Because it's never too late to feel loved. And never too late to begin again. With all our gratitude, Legends of the Fall. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. If Charlotte's story moved you, her strength, her heartbreak, her healing, and her new beginning, we kindly invite you to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support, from the bottom of our hearts, keeps us going, and reminds us why we tell these stories full of love, redemption, and unexpected turns. Please share this story with someone who needs a gentle reminder that love, real love, always finds its way. And don't leave just yet. At the end of this video, another one of our romantic tales will appear on your screen. Click and let yourself be surprised by another emotional story like this one.